Amara had always been the kind of woman who gave her whole heart to her family. Living in Kigoma, she cooked, cared, and supported her husband Jonas in every way she could. But Jonas, a proud banker with polished suits and framed certificates, never missed a chance to remind her of what she lacked. To him, she was just a secondary school dropout. In front of his friends, he would laugh loudly and say things like, "She's not smart enough to sit at my table." The men would chuckle, and Amara would force a smile, pretending it didn't cut her deeply. Inside, though, the words stung like knives. Each insult replayed in her mind long after the guests had gone. At night, when the house was quiet, Amara would lie awake, her tears soaking the pillow. She asked herself why love had to come with so much humiliation. But she never answered back, never raised her voice. She knew that silence was her shield, even when her heart was breaking. What Jonas didn't know was that behind her silence, something powerful was growing. While he dismissed her as a nobody, Amara was quietly working on a secret of her own, a dream that gave her hope, a plan that no insult could destroy. Every cruel word only added fuel to the fire inside her. She was determined that one day, Jonas would see her worth, not through arguments, but through something he could never laugh at again. Amara's story did not begin with Jonas. Long before she became a wife, she was just a young girl in a small village near Kigoma, where life was simple but hard. Her family barely had enough to eat, and school was always a struggle. She loved learning, but when secondary school ended, she knew the truth. University was far beyond what her parents could afford. While her classmates packed their bags for higher studies, Amara stayed home, watching her dreams of a degree fade away like smoke. But Amara had something no classroom could give her. Growing up, she spent hours with her grandmother, who taught her the old ways of healing with herbs and plants. She learned which leaves soothed burns, which oils softened skin, and which roots could ease pain. To Amara, the world of nature became her secret school. She didn't have certificates to hang on a wall, but in her hands, she carried knowledge passed down through generations. When she married Jonas, she hoped he would value her for who she was. But Jonas wore his education like a crown. At every gathering, he bragged about his degrees, about how his intelligence placed him above others. Sometimes, he mocked Amara right in front of people, telling them she was just a dropout. She would sit quietly, smiling faintly, but inside she felt small. Yet behind the closed doors of their home, Amara's silence turned into strength. In the little backyard, she began to experiment. She crushed herbs, mixed oils, and tested them on her own skin. She wrote notes in an old exercise book, adjusting her recipes until they felt right. While Jonas polished his speeches about banking, Amara was polishing jars of handmade oils that smelled of nature and love. She didn't tell him. Why would she? He would only laugh, calling it village play. So she worked quietly, letting her small creations pile up on a wooden shelf. Every time she opened one of those jars and touched the smooth cream she had made, she felt a spark of pride. Amara believed something Jonas could never understand. Degrees could open doors, but ideas could build new worlds. She carried a deep faith that one day, her herbs and oils would bring her respect. Not only for herself, but also for women like her who were told they were not enough. While Jonas measured life in papers and titles, Amara measured hers in courage and patience. She knew she didn't need a certificate to prove her worth. Her hands, her knowledge, and her vision were enough. And though no one else could see it yet, Amara held on to the quiet certainty that her little backyard experiments would one day grow into something far bigger than anyone imagined. The day of the family gathering was supposed to be joyful. Relatives had come from near and far, filling Jonas and Amara's home with laughter, food, and the noise of children playing. Amara moved around quietly, serving plates, refilling drinks, making sure everyone was comfortable. She had always believed that family was about love and respect, but that day, she was reminded once again of the sharp edge of Jonas's pride. As the men sat together discussing money and business, Jonas leaned back in his chair, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "What does Amara know about business?" he said, smirking. "She doesn't even have a diploma." His words cut through the air like a slap. The table erupted with laughter. Some of his relatives shook their heads, others chuckled, as if mocking her was just harmless fun. Amara felt her cheeks burn, but she forced herself to keep smiling while she set down a tray of food. On the inside, though, her heart was breaking. Every laugh around that table felt like a stone thrown at her dignity. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to defend herself, to tell them that education wasn't the only path to wisdom, but her voice stayed locked in her throat. Arguing would only make things worse, and she knew Jonas would enjoy seeing her stumble over her. So instead, she kept her silence. But silence didn't mean weakness. As she stood in the kitchen later, her hands trembling while she washed the dishes, she whispered to herself, one day, she promised, she would prove that her worth was not measured by a piece of paper, but by what she could create with her own 2 hands. She thought about the jars of oils hidden on the little shelf in her, the ones she had blended carefully, experimenting late at night when the house was quiet. They weren't just mixtures. They were seeds of a dream, waiting to bloom. And in that moment, as she wiped her tears, she made a silent vow. Jonas's laughter, his relatives mocking, the sting of humiliation, it would all be fuel. She would not try to argue her value anymore. She would let her work speak for her. She would let her success silence every cruel word that had ever been thrown at her. So she walked back into the living room, her head held just a little higher. No one noticed the fire in her eyes, because they were too busy laughing at Jonas's jokes. But inside Amara, something had shifted. She no longer felt crushed. She felt challenged. And deep in her heart, she knew that one day the same people who laughed at her would clap their hands in her honor. For now, she swallowed her pride. But soon, they would taste the strength of her silence. Amara's secret began with a small basket. Inside it were just a few jars of her homemade oils, carefully sealed and labeled by hand. She had been making them quietly for months, testing different herbs, blending different scents, until she finally felt ready. One early morning, while Jonas was already on his way to the bank, Amara carried her basket to the local market in Kigoma. At first, she was nervous. The market was always full of noise, vendors shouting prices, women bargaining, children running between stalls. She chose a small spot under a tree and laid out her jars. For a while, no one paid attention. But then a woman stopped, opened a jar, and rubbed a little oil on her hand. Her face lit up. "This is so soft," she said. She bought one. That first sale felt like magic to Amara. By the end of the day, half her basket was gone. The women who bought from her told their friends, and soon more customers came looking for the lady with the natural oil. Every coin she earned, she tucked away safely. She didn't spend it carelessly. Instead, she bought more jars, more herbs, better packaging. Little by little, her secret grew. She gave her products a name, Asili Glow. Asili meant nature, and Amara wanted every woman who used her oils to feel connected to something pure, something real. She even started writing simple instructions and tying them to each jar with string. Customers loved the personal touch, and soon, her table at the market was always busy. What made Amara happiest was seeing how the oils helped people. Women came back saying their skin felt better, that their children's rashes had healed, that they had never used anything like it. Each compliment was like water to her spirit. For so long, she had been called useless and uneducated, but now strangers were calling her clever and talented. Meanwhile, at home, Jonas began to notice small changes. Amara always had money for household needs. Sometimes she replaced old utensils without asking him for cash. Sometimes she even slipped money into the children's school requirements before he could complain. "Where is all this coming from?" Jonas asked once, raising an eyebrow. Amara smiled softly and shrugged. "Just small chores here and there," she said. Jonas laughed dismissively, shaking his head. "As long as it keeps you busy," he replied, already forgetting about it. He never imagined that behind her calm smile was a growing business that was slowly taking root in Kigoma. Night after night, while Jonas boasted about his career, Amara was busy counting coins, planning the next step. She didn't need recognition yet. What she needed was patience. She knew that Asili Glow was more than jars of oil. It was the beginning of her freedom. And though Jonas had no idea, his wife was no longer just the quiet woman he mocked. She was quietly becoming a businesswoman, one jar at a time. One afternoon at the market, something unexpected happened. A woman passing through Kigoma stopped by Amara's stall. She was different from the usual customers, dressed smartly, carrying a notebook and speaking with a city accent. She introduced herself as a radio presenter from Dar es Salaam, in town to visit relatives. Out of curiosity, she opened a jar of Amara's oil, rubbed a little on her hand, and smiled. "This smells amazing," she said. She asked about the ingredients, and Amara explained how she blended herbs and oils from local plants. The presenter bought several jars, promising to try them out. Amara didn't think much of it. She was just happy another customer had shown interest. A week later, Amara received a phone call that nearly made her drop the pot she was stirring. The radio presenter's voice was on the other end, full of excitement. She told Amara that she had fallen in love with the oils and had even spoken about them on her radio show. Listeners had called in, curious about Asili Glow. Then came the part that left Amara breathless. She was invited to showcase her products at a business forum in Dar es Salaam, where major investors and entrepreneurs would be present. Amara's heart raced. This was no ordinary opportunity. This was the kind of stage she had never even dreamed of standing on. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if she embarrassed herself? What if people laughed at her the way Jonas and his family always had? But deep inside, she felt a voice whisper, "This is your moment." She didn't tell Jonas. She knew exactly what he would say, that she was wasting her time, that without a degree she had no right to sit among educated business people. So instead, she kept her secret close to her chest. At night, while Jonas watched TV in the living room, Amara sat quietly in her room, preparing. She wrote down notes about her products, practiced introducing herself, and even rehearsed how she would stand and speak in front of a crowd. Every jar she polished, every label she fixed, she did it with extra care. She pictured herself in Dar es Salaam, standing tall, holding her oils with pride. She imagined investors asking questions, and instead of shrinking, she imagined herself answering with confidence. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just dreaming, she was preparing for something real. The night before she was set to travel, Amara packed her bags in silence. She folded her clothes neatly, placed her best jars of Asili Glow inside, and whispered a small prayer. Her hands trembled, but her spirit was steady. Jonas had no idea. To him, she was still just a wife with small chores. But soon, the world would see her for who she really was. Amara didn't need to announce her plans. She believed in something stronger, letting her work speak when the right moment came. And this moment, this forum, was going to change everything. The big day arrived, and the air in Dar es Salaam buzzed with energy. The business forum was packed with entrepreneurs, investors, and journalists. Banners hung across the hall, cameras flashed, and people walked around in sharp suits and high heels. For Amara, it felt like stepping into another world. She clutched her small bag filled with samples of Asili Glow, her heart pounding like a drum. She kept whispering to herself, "You belong here. You belong here." What she didn't know until she got there was that Jonas was also attending the same event. When she saw him in his crisp suit, shaking hands and laughing confidently with other bankers, her breath caught. He hadn't noticed her yet, and for a moment, she thought of slipping away. But then she remembered the jars in her bag, the nights of preparation, and the promise she had made to herself. She straightened her back and stayed. Jonas was one of the speakers. When his name was called, he strutted to the stage full of pride. He spoke smoothly, bragging about his career, his degrees, and the importance of proper education for success. The audience clapped politely, though some looked bored. Jonas smiled proudly, convinced he had impressed the room. Then came a moment no one expected. The host called Amara's name. "Next, we welcome Mrs. Amara from Kigoma, founder of Asili Glow." Jonas's jaw tightened. He turned his head sharply, his eyes narrowing as he saw his wife stand up. A mocking smirk spread across his face, as if he was waiting for her to stumble and embarrass herself. But Amara didn't stumble. She walked to the stage with calm steps, her head held high. She greeted the audience warmly, her voice steady. Then she opened her bag and placed jars of Asili Glow on the table. She spoke about her journey, how she started small in Kigoma, how women at the market loved her products, how word spread through trust and results. The hall grew quieter. Amara shared testimonials from customers who had returned again and again, praising her oils for healing skin problems and bringing back confidence. She explained how she reinvested every coin to grow her brand. She even showed simple sales records she had brought, proving her growth. Instead of stumbling, she shone. Her words were not polished like Jonas's, but they were real, filled with honesty and passion. And that was what moved the audience. By the time she finished, the silence in the room was heavy, not of disinterest, but of awe. Then came the applause. Loud, long, heartfelt. People rose to their feet, clapping and nodding in respect. Jonas sat frozen in his chair. The smirk on his face had vanished. The woman he had mocked for years, the dropout he had belittled, was now standing on the same stage, commanding the same audience. And she had done it without a single certificate to her name. For the first time, Jonas realized the power of Amara's silence. And for the first time, the world saw her true worth. When the applause for Amara finally settled, one of the investors stood up and asked her a question. "Mrs. Amara, your products are wonderful. But tell us, are you working alone, or do you have a team behind you?" Amara smiled softly, her eyes shining. "I don't work alone," she said. "In Kigoma, 20 women from my village work with me. Some help gather herbs, some prepare the oils, and others sell at different markets. Many of them were jobless before, but now they can support their families." The room stirred with excitement. The investors exchanged glances, impressed. Creating jobs, especially for women in rural areas, was no small thing. Another investor raised his hand and said, "That is powerful. You are not just running a business. You are changing lives." Jonas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His face grew tight as the crowd leaned forward, eager to hear more from Amara. For years, he had believed she was nothing more than a dropout, a simple housewife. And now, here she was, standing tall, her words commanding more respect than all his degrees ever had. The questions kept coming. Investors asked about her vision, her production capacity, her long-term goals. Amara answered each one carefully, her voice steady but passionate. She spoke about wanting to expand, to train more women, to use local resources so that her village could thrive. She dreamed of taking Asili Glow beyond Tanzania, across East Africa, and even the world. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of the biggest investors at the event stood up. "We want to support you," he announced. "We are offering you a grant to scale your production, along with a partnership to help distribute Asili Glow nationwide." The hall erupted into applause again. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled down notes. Amara's heart pounded, but she managed to bow her head respectfully. She felt tears threatening to fall, but she held them back. This wasn't the time for tears, this was the time for strength. Meanwhile, Jonas sat frozen. The claps that once belonged to him now filled the room for his wife. He had always thought he was the star, the educated one, the respected banker. But in that moment, nobody was looking at him. All eyes were on Amara, the woman he had mocked, insulted, and dismissed. For Amara, it wasn't about revenge. She wasn't thinking about Jonas or his cruel words. She was thinking about the women back home, the mothers who would now have steady work, the children who would go to school with full stomachs, the dignity that would return to families through her small jars of oil. As the applause grew louder, Jonas lowered his head, his pride breaking into pieces. And Amara, standing in the center of the stage, realized her silence had finally spoken louder than all his mockery. The girl who once cried alone in her bed was now the woman being celebrated by the world. The morning after the business forum, Dar es Salaam buzzed with the news. Newspapers carried bold headlines on their front pages. "School dropout builds million-dollar herbal business." Amara's picture was everywhere, her standing proudly with jars of Asili Glow on the table, investors by her side. Radio stations talked about her, and social media filled with posts praising her courage and determination. Back in Kigoma, the story spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had once whispered behind her back now looked at her with wide eyes. These were the same people who had laughed when Jonas mocked her in public, the same ones who thought she was just a housewife with no diploma. Now they greeted her with respect. Women stopped her in the street, saying, "You have made us proud, Amara. You've shown that even without a degree, we can still achieve something great." Her relatives, who once chuckled at Jonas's jokes during family gathering, now called her a role model. They told others proudly, "She is our daughter, our sister, our blood." The tables had turned completely. Where there was once mockery, now there was admiration. Jonas, however, felt the sting of shame. Everywhere he went, people talked about Amara, not him. In the bank where he worked, his colleagues congratulated him, but not for his career, for being married to the brilliant woman behind Asili Glow. Each compliment about Amara felt like a knife in his pride. He had spent years tearing her down, and now the whole community lifted her higher than he had ever been. At home, the tension grew. Jonas watched as neighbors came by just to shake Amara's hand. He watched her receive phone calls from journalists, investors, and women from other villages who wanted to join her growing business. The woman he had dismissed as not smart enough was now being celebrated as a leader, an innovator, and an inspiration. Amara, on the other hand, carried herself with grace. She didn't boast. She didn't throw Jonas's insults back at him. She remained humble, always reminding people that Asili Glow was not just about her, but about the women who worked with her and the families who depended on her. Yet behind her quiet smile, she knew something had shifted forever. Respect had finally replaced ridicule. The community organized a small celebration in her honor. Songs were sung, dances performed, and women raised their voices, thanking her for creating jobs and restoring dignity in the village. Jonas sat in the crowd, clapping stiffly, his face heavy with jealousy and regret. For the first time, he was no longer the center of attention. His wife was. That night, as the village lights dimmed and the celebration ended, Amara stood outside looking at the stars. She remembered every insult, every time she had cried in silence, and she realized the truth. She hadn't just built a business. She had rewritten her story. The woman once mocked as a dropout was now the pride of an entire community. Jonas could no longer hide from the truth. Everywhere he turned, people praised Amara. Her name filled newspapers, radio programs, and even church gatherings. What once had been his pride, his degrees, his banking job, now seemed small compared to the empire his wife was quietly building. The weight of shame pressed hard on him, until one evening he finally sat down with Amara. He cleared his throat, his voice softer than usual. "Amara," he began, "I owe you an apology. I've been arrogant. I treated you as if you were less than me, and I see now how wrong I was." Amara looked at him steadily. She had waited years for words like this, but they didn't move her the way they might have once. Too many nights of tears, too many humiliations, had built a wall inside her heart. She stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I didn't believe in you," Jonas admitted, his hands fidgeting. "I thought success only came from education, from degrees. But you've proven me wrong. You've built something incredible, something I never imagined. Please forgive me." Amara's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. Jonas, I don't hate you, but you must understand, respect is not given because of degrees. Respect is earned by actions. She paused, letting the words sink in. For years you mocked me, laughed at me, and made me feel worthless. Now you want to take it back because the world claps for me. But respect isn't about applause. It's about how you treat people when no one is watching. Jonas lowered his head. He had no answer. The silence between them was heavy. Their marriage, once filled with Amara's quiet submission, now stood on new ground. She was no longer the wife who swallowed her pain. She was a woman who had found her voice, her strength, and her worth. From that day, Jonas tried to change. He spoke to her with more care, offered help where he could, and even bragged about Asili Glow to his friends. But Amara never forgot the years of belittling. She accepted his apology, but she did not let him back into the place of control he once held. She made it clear through her actions she would never again allow him, or anyone, to make her feel small. Her business, her dignity, and her confidence were hers to protect. Jonas could stand beside her if he wished, but he could never stand above her again. At night, as Amara worked on new ideas for Asili Glow, Jonas sometimes watched her quietly, regret written across his face. He realized too late that he had spent years mocking the very woman who would one day outshine him. And Amara? She didn't seek revenge or victory over him. She simply moved forward, stronger than ever, carrying with her the truth she had learned. True respect is earned, not demanded, and she had earned hers through resilience and action. Years passed, and Amara's dream grew far beyond the small market stall in Kigoma. Asili Glow spread across Tanzania, then into Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and beyond. Shelves in big city stores now carried her products, and her name became a symbol of possibility for women who once believed they had no chance. What began with a single basket of oils had turned into a company that created jobs for hundreds of women, lifting entire families out of poverty. Invitations soon arrived from places Amara had never imagined. International conferences called her to share her story. She traveled to Nairobi, Johannesburg, and even Europe, standing on stages where powerful leaders once spoke. Everywhere she went, people listened to her with respect, not because of a certificate on paper, but because of the truth in her journey. At one such conference, the hall was filled with global leaders, investors, and journalists. Among the audience, quietly seated in the back, was Jonas. He no longer smirked, no longer mocked. He sat still, humbled, watching the wife he once ridiculed shine brighter than ever. When it was time for questions, an interviewer leaned forward and asked the one everyone was thinking. Amara, how did you build this empire without a degree? The room went silent, waiting for her answer. Amara smiled gently, her eyes calm but filled with strength. Then she said, education is powerful, but belief, resilience, and vision can silence any room. The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation that echoed across the hall. And in that moment, Amara knew her story had come full circle. The woman once mocked as a dropout was now a voice that inspired the world.